What does Remembrance Day mean to students of today?
Not much, really. It's sad, but it's true.
What are you really thinking about when you stand for a moment of silence or listen to the last post?
See, we celebrate Remembrance Day to thank the young men and women who sacrificed their lives to keep Canada free.
But how often do you actually take a moment to comprehend how much we owe to these people?
It really is hard to understand how one person who fought so many decades ago could have such an impact on our lives today.
It really is understandable why up until now we haven't paid much interest.
There's so much history, so many good stories.
Despite what you might think, life on the home front during the Second World War wasn't that much different than it is today. Teenagers went to dances, idolized movie stars, found school boring, and looked forward to the weekend.
When young men and women went overseas, they left behind friends, family, and the things they loved. They no longer had to worry about school.
Instead, the prospect of death became a reality.
If we were to get out of our lives for just 1 minute and make the connection that 60 years ago these kids were just our age, it could have been us.
Kids who volunteered because they wanted to look macho or because everyone else was doing it. Like us today, they really had no idea how terrible war could be.
We were so lucky to be able to meet and interview all of these veterans.
The documentaries that you're about to see focus on the infantry, Navy, Air Force, and women during World War II.
Nobody can tell the story of the infantry like an infantryman. How do they live? What do they eat? What do they think of? They're hard questions for an observer to answer. It takes someone who has found out the hard way.
I'm Victor J. Bulger. I joined the Army when I was 17. They said, now if you want to go join the Army now, pack your bag and get the bus to Kingston.
It is late August of 1939. Thousands of young men and women from across Canada are about to volunteer to fight in a battle bigger than they can comprehend. A battle so great, it will change their lives and the history of the world forever.
When we joined, we had to put our age to 18. And unknown to me, my older brother, who was a year and a half older than me, he came down about 10 days later. And on parade, the major stopped in front of me and he said, Bulger, your mother must have been a remarkable woman. And I said, I don't know about that, sir. And then he said, well, can you tell me, or can you explain there's only 6 months difference between you and your brother Jim? And I said, Jim must have made a mistake, sir. He shoved his face up to mine and said, you and I know who made the mistake, now don't we? I said, yes, sir. He said, are you going to give me any trouble? I said, no, sir. When you're young like that, you have, I guess they say, the optimism of youth. I went home and told my mother I was going to Kingston on a course with the Army, and the last word from her was, will you make sure you're back in time for school in September? I was trained as a gun number to fire the gun, and then a month or two later they also sent me on a physical training course to teach PT to the men. We didn't really get into action until July 1943, when we first shipped up to Scotland, and then the regiment with the 1st Canadian Division joined up with the 8th Army on the invasion of Sicily.
Early on this morning of July the 10th, Allied forces, under the command of General Eisenhower, began landing operations in Sicily.
The invasion of Sicily, known as Operation Husky, was the next step in the Allied assault. It became the largest amphibious operation of World War II. On July 10, 1943, British, Canadian, and American troops struggled towards the southern and eastern shorelines. When they first stepped foot ashore, what became known as the Italian Campaign had begun.
What amazed us really in Sicily, most of all, was the dirt roads, and it was so very, very dry and hot, and to see a truck going along the road would immediately become covered with white dust. We were roughly 20 months in Sicily and Italy, and actually that got to be part of our life. For example, sitting by the gun, and we were either firing a gun or moving ahead into another position. The Germans were moved out of Sicily fairly quickly. We didn't get into any heavy firing in Sicily.
After conquering Sicily, Canadian troops traveled across the Straits of Messina to invade mainland Italy.
On the 3rd of September, we were part of the invasion forces into Italy, and we landed at the toe of Italy, at the city of Reggio Calabria.
The first soldiers to arrive ashore in mainland Italy were part of the British 8th Army, which included British troops and the 1st Canadian Division. Actually,
There was very little fighting at the southern part of Italy until we worked farther north. From about the 5th of December to the end of December, the 1st Canadian Division's job was to take Ortona, and it was a very bloody battle. Ortona was the first toughest battle, and we lost 7 captains in 7 days. It's the infantry that really take the pounding during the war.
In the spring of 1945, the Allies had broken the Germans' last line of defense.
The purpose of being in Italy was in order to keep as many Germans there as possible. People say, were you scared? We were scared a lot of times, but sometimes we were more scared of not being able to support our friend in a time of emergency. After all this killing and fighting and so on, you still have the same problems.
When planes departed from the main base, their pilots never knew if they would see their loved ones again. Whether they were leaving for overseas missions or defending the home front, these brave soldiers risked their lives for their nation. They can never be recognized enough, nor can anyone take away the memory of World War II. They stood tall, strong, and brave in their ongoing fight for freedom. These are the Canadians of the Royal Canadian Air Force.
Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter's silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of, wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering along, I've chased the shouting wind and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up, up the long delirious burning blue, I've topped the wind-swept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent lifting mind I've trod the high untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God.
I was 19 years old. I turned 20 and 21 in England, and we were sort of free and easy. We weren't afraid of really anything like that. And I joined the Air Force because my older brother had been in the Army. My father was in the Army in World War I. My younger brother was too young to join, but he was in the Army Reserve. And we were a patriotic family, so it was something really in those days you were expected to do.
Training was very methodical. Sometimes everybody would say, this is a pain in the neck. Why do we have to do this? But if you were to carry on, if you were to learn to be something, either a pilot, a navigator, a bomb aimer, an air gunner, or a wireless operator, you had to know what you were doing.
On your first trip, you're at the end of the air traffic. Maybe you have 500 aircraft. And all of a sudden, you see these bombs going up and the fires coming, everything lighting up. And you see the first bombing rate. It's really something emotional.
On one operation, we were coming into the target. I looked up and there was an aircraft dead above me. Same thing in Avro, Lancaster. As bomb bay doors were open, I could count and see all of the bombs in that aircraft, dead above. And I just said to the skipper, there's an aircraft above us with the bomb doors open, left or right. Down those bombs came, and it was just as though I could almost reach out and touch them. If we had have stayed without moving, we would have had bombs dropped on us. We survived. I don't know because it was our skills. We were all trained. We were all trained at the same time. No one was trained any different than the other. We survived. Was it from our skill, or was it just pure dead luck?
Can't you tell? This is the latest fashion for Mademoiselle.
I'm the proudest girl in the world. There are lots of reasons to why I'm in. With every soldier I'm out to win. We're out to build a shorter road into Berlin. That's why I'm proud.
I'd been to high school in Lethbridge, Alberta, and was planning on being a teacher. And then I had a boyfriend. So we got engaged and got married in '42. And it wasn't too long before he was going to be in the Army. And I did what a lot of women did. If they didn't have a family, they followed their husbands. So I think any woman who was married and she could follow her husband did.
Well, we were in the show business, and we were entertaining troops, and then they wanted people to go around to the camps. Well, at one time you used to be able to time it when the planes were coming over. They used to come over during the daytime. Sometimes they waited until it got around supper time. People were coming home from work, and when the planes came over, they'd come down, they'd swoop down so low. You could even see the German sitting in the plane with his goggles on. And they just fire on anything or anyone. It was sad in the hospital seeing them there, but it was part of the war, and this is what was going on. It was something you had to live with. And then they billeted us in large homes that had been turned over to the government, and then they stripped these homes of just the bare necessities, and we all stayed there. In the meantime, we used to try to get to the dances too. We loved ballroom dancing. We had our silver dance shoes. And this airman said to me, "Let me carry your shoes for you." So he carried my shoes, and when we got home, he said, "I've only got one shoe. I've lost a shoe." Anyway, 2 or 3 weeks after, I was at the dance, and one of the young men came up to me to thank me. I said, "What for?" He said, "Your shoe. It's hanging up in the Lancaster for good luck." I mean, it was wonderful to be there and see all these people from different countries. We had Polish, Czechoslovakian, Australian, New Zealand, French, just every nationality, unbelievable. And it was interesting just seeing everyone and knowing that they're all there for a good cause. You grew up fast because you had to. You had no choice. I lost people that I knew. We used to go to the dances. And one time I went to the dance, and this young man, I'd been seeing him a few times, and he wanted to take me to the movies. So he said that he would meet me outside this movie. And I went down there. And he didn't show up, but he didn't stand me up. His plane didn't come back.
Because of the ones who did fight and lost their lives, and there were so many thousands. I went back last year over to Juno Beach, and when you see the rows and rows and rows of crosses, and the ages are 16, 17, 18, well, it must to them, like the age group now, they must think it's so long ago, you know, that who even remembers any of them. But my generation, we do remember. Yeah.
One of Canada's most pivotal roles in World War II was his defense of Allied merchant ships during the Battle of the Atlantic. Being a land isolated by water, Britain was significantly dependent on naval trade. The greatest threat to Britain's survival during the war was the damage caused by German U-boats to vital Allied supplies and troops and merchant convoys. For 6 years, the battle raged on, but despite German forces, Canada's Navy only grew stronger. Over 97,000 men enlisted their services with the Royal Canadian Navy during the war. The main task for these brave men was not a simple one. Through treacherous waters, freezing temperatures, and impossible weather, they protected our merchant navy and convoys against Germany's terrifying U-boats. Most of them were young, many still in high school.
Name is George Lovett. I'm 79 years old. I was born in a place called Upper Melbourne, Quebec. My dad was on the railroad. My mother came from Glasgow when she was quite young and married in Canada. They were both from England and Scotland, and true believers in the British Empire, which it was then. Close to my town was an Air Force base, and I had 6 sisters. And you know what the airmen were like. And I hated airmen ever since, so I joined the Navy. When I was a teenager, my favorite thing was fishing. I had my own boat, we lived on a river, and I spent most of my time on that river. I always had my own boat, and even when I was 14, I thought my boat was part of the war. And when I joined up, I was young, I was 16, I hadn't been anywhere. I didn't know too many people outside in my village, and it taught me to be interested in other people, you know, and take part in other things. It was time for me to go, I think. It's right deep down in my heart, I think, now is the time. So I snuck off to Quebec City, and they'd take anybody. And I joined in Quebec City.
I think I was scared when they swore me in. I didn't know whether I could quit right then or not, you know. But you couldn't. Once you're in, you're in.
By the time the war had ended, Canada had acquired an impressive fleet of 450 ships, making the Royal Canadian Navy the 4th largest naval power in the world.
Our job was to protect the convoy from U-boats. And in the early parts, 43, 44, the Germans had almost control of the North Atlantic. They had so many submarines. And many times at night, you would be sitting on or standing and watching, doing your watch, and you'd see a ship blown up, and you'd rush, try and find the submarine. If somebody was injured on a ship and died, on the quarterdeck, the captain would hold a service. The body would be put on a board, and it would lift it up, and there was a weight into the water. And that's where a lot of men are right now, still under there. Adjusting to normal life after the war, it was difficult to know what to do. You realize that now you're on your own. I was over 20 by then, and I had to get along and get my life under control. There's an old saying in the Legion, ever since it was born, lest we forget. If we do forget, then we're in trouble, because, you know, if you're not going to protect your country for good reasons, I don't mean going out and starting a war ourselves, but lest we forget those people who lost their lives. And like people in the Navy who were torpedoed, they have no graves, eh? Like the soldiers and the airmen who were buried overseas, ours are in the water. So you must remember those things. You can't think about it every day, you know. Once a year on November the 11th is the time to get out there and pour your heart out and just keep remembering. If you keep remembering, we won't get into the same problems that we've been into before.
If you're like us, you'll probably be amazed to discover that we're surrounded by history makers. Some of them could even be your own family.
Talk to them.
We're now going to leave you with a few final words from our veterans.
Without those wars, we might not be here today. We might not have the freedom, the ability to ask any questions you want to in a free world.
War was hell, always will be hell, and that Remembrance Day is not a celebration of war at all. It's a Memorial Day to remember those friends of ours, and in the Air Force I had some of them who lost their lives because of this war.
And then I would wave at the orchestra like that, and then And then I could really kick, but I'd go, "Ah!" and come out with there wasn't no farmer who had no sow. Do you know that beautiful little ditty? Anyway, that would fool them. And nobody slept while I was on.